Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes, bienvenue à Lyon dans ce bâtiment H7 de Lyon
Hello,
Confluence.
everybody. Welcome to this conference called Lyon Confluence towards new energy consumption. So he is just telling you if you want to listen to English, just choose the English. Now, obviously, we all know this famous Eureka cry here, and this clearly. Now, obviously, there weren't any smartphones at the time here, so there's no evidence that clearly shows that this is right here. There's one thing we are sure about is that 20 centuries later, in 2016 in Lyon, Lyon was born. And this is a public-private partnership which is there to develop innovative projects in terms of resource management and new resources, health, but also in terms of energy. This is driven by Lyon Confluence and by the developer here. And all these stakeholders suggest to consume renewable energy produced locally, and to consume this locally renewable energy. That'll be the topic of this subject. This will be twofold here. We'll have a roundtable coming back to the project taking place in Lyon. We got 3 projects of collective self-consumption. A second roundtable where we'll consider this energy consumption dimension. We'll decipher it, we'll talk about it, and we'll consider its outlook, its future. Now we know basically about everything about this conference. Let's start off with a small motion design video, which will come back to all these projects, all these innovations in Lyon. Now, this is basically everything I've just explained to you, but it's much more straightforward, you would see. And then we'll come back with the first guests here.
Est un territoire de 150 hectares situé au sud de la presqu'île de Lyon, entre Rhône et Saône, dans le prolongement du centre-ville historique. Gagné sur les eaux, puis longtemps consacré à l'industrie, il est devenu la Confluence, un quartier résolument vivant et attractif, placé sous le signe de la proximité. Une ville mixte, durable et attentive au bien-être de ses usagers. Un territoire d'innovation qui cherche à construire une ville adaptée au changement climatique. Engagé dans de nombreux partenariats, Lyon Confluence a placé, depuis 2003, le sujet de l'énergie au cœur de ses préoccupations. Récemment, ce sont 3 opérations qui permettent de tester à la Confluence l'autoconsommation collective. Ancienne usine de chaudronnerie, la halle Chirard est devenue en 2019 H7, le lieu totem de la French Tech de Lyon. C'est aujourd'hui un lieu de vie de 4000 m² où l'on teste une blockchain qui doit sécuriser l'échange d'énergie entre les différents occupants du bâtiment. Sur le toit, 1600 m² de panneaux photovoltaïques produisent plus de 260 kW par an. Idéal est un programme immobilier de 12 500 m² qui se compose de 5 bâtiments, dont un construit en terre crue. Les 850 m² de panneaux photovoltaïques en toiture ont pour objectif de couvrir 50% des besoins en électricité des occupants, des habitants et des salariés regroupés dans une communauté énergétique. Une première à cette échelle. Au sous-sol, une batterie permet de stocker l'énergie solaire produite en journée et d'en différer la consommation. Sur 32 500 m² et 11 bâtiments, Solis permettra de tester l'autoconsommation collective à plus grande échelle encore. 2200 m² de panneaux photovoltaïques en toiture et une centrale de cogénération au gaz vert au sous-sol fourniront eau chaude et électricité. Le point commun entre ces 3 opérations, des programmes mixtes qui permettent de tester l'autoconsommation collective à différentes échelles et ainsi de replacer l'usager au cœur du système. L'énergie renouvelable produite est consommée par les occupants des bâtiments qui sont aussi les copropriétaires des installations énergétiques. Habitants, salariés et commerçants deviennent ainsi les consommateurs de leur énergie. Avec l'autoconsommation collective, l'énergie renouvelable produite est consommée par les bureaux et commerces en journée et par les habitants le week-end et en soirée. L'autoconsommation collective présente de nombreux avantages. un coût de l'énergie garanti sur le long terme, les installations appartenant aux propriétaires des logements et bureaux, le développement des énergies renouvelables en offrant un nouveau modèle économique, une sollicitation moins importante du réseau électrique public et surtout une implication plus forte des consommateurs fédérés autour d'un projet énergétique commun. C'est ce qu'on appelle une communauté énergétique, une entité juridique qui a pour objectif de proposer des avantages environnementaux, économiques ou sociaux à ses membres plutôt que de générer des profits financiers. Un nouveau modèle socio-économique qui se développe partout en Europe.
Et nous voici de retour en plateau pour cette première table ronde de cette...
And we're back on stage for this first round table here. I've got the pleasure to welcome Edouard Wood, your head of engineering for Bouygues Immobilier. In a nutshell, what's your job? I'm responsible for engineering for Bouygues Immobilier. This concerns residential housing, but also tertiary activities and all at community level. You're the general manager of MX. Can you just explain your company to you? MX, just briefly, it's to optimize energy and to network the district. Eric Marcos, who's head for EDF ENR here, French Electricity Board. Now the question is, once again, just introduce yourself briefly here. Yes, hello everybody. Sorry for being with you just online and not being there in person. I work for EDF and I look for the development of innovative offers towards customers that may be public authorities or companies, and also developers here. Thank you for specifying that. This conference has got an educational approach here, and I'd like we're going to define this collective self-consumption, and then we'll talk about projects. Talking about this, who can explain collective self-consumption here for lay people like myself? Now, just in a synopsis, in a nutshell, here, this is my definition. We've all got our own definition. What we can say initially, I would say it's inviting people to consume locally produced energy here. That's the first definition. From a more societal point of view, we consider that it's a translation in terms of the local energy, in terms of what we call the locavores here, the fact of consuming locally here. And if we consider in terms of the challenges here, and that's probably what's more important. It's a challenge for urban operators, be they planners or developers, because it complexifies operations in general here. It's also a challenge for users and the residents of these neighborhoods, of these districts, because to produce and consume your energy locally is a bit more complicated, a bit more complex, and it's obviously easier, more difficult to grow your tomatoes at home than to buy them from a supermarket. That's a second challenge. Now the third challenge is, and that's for the producer of renewable energies. He's moving from an area where he knew what price he was going to pay, and now he has to find a new business model. So that's the third point for me. Then the fourth point for me, Patrick will be able to talk about much better, and that's the subject of the grid operator or network operator. They continue to play an essential role, because obviously this electricity will go via the grid, but their role will be quite different compared to the traditional role of a grid operator. And then finally, since an international European conference, just talking about the French model, we talking about a very centralized society, very centralized country, and this is obviously challenged by this local approach and locally producing and consuming energy. Thank you for those definitions here, and let's move from theory to practice here with this first focus on Solis here. This is a project that brings you both together here. Now, how can we actually present this project for those people who haven't heard about it? Well, the mixity, where we're talking about offices housing here and shop activities here. Now we talking about the Confluence area of Lyon, where we have to ensure a total control very early on here. It's a very ambitious project, but really under control with clear objectives here. And how about if we talk about the residents here? What would you say about their point of view? Now, I'm going to talk about the board lines of the project here, but mainly focusing on the energy community we want to put in place. We're talking about a project concerning 35,000 square meters with two types of production in terms of electricity. We've got photovoltaic panels and cogeneration. Choice was to go for self-consumption in terms of with a cogeneration approach and not through photovoltaic panels. Today, if we had to go in hindsight, we probably would have gone more for photovoltaic panels here due to regulatory issues. So we didn't really have much choice here, and we went for a cogeneration approach here. Now, this self-consumption takes place in 7 buildings with a rare mix of tertiary activities, office space, and on the other side, housing units. So an interesting choice, very ambitious here, because we are mixing buildings that are on 2 units, 2 populations, tertiary population, people working, and residents here. And we hope that this self-consumption can find its business model here. What's the level of maturity of this project, and what are the key problems here? Is it technical? I mean, you talked about regulatory aspects. Does it require the commitment and the involvement of the resident from a technical point of view? It is a challenge, a notion of energy mixity. But for me, I've been involved in many projects in this district, in this neighborhood. It really is the residents here, the users here, the people who actually live there. And then afterwards, on the other side, we've got the people who are working there, and then they are there in transition. It's the notion of living together, which is extremely important here. And we're trying to percolate that down since the very beginning of the project here. I think you may be talking about that just afterwards. It's a kind of what we call energy coaching approach here that takes place after the units are delivered. So the challenges are clearly there. Now, who's doing what in this project between your two structures? I mean, you're the two of you here, the two of you on this project here. Well, I'm a developer here, property developer. I'm there to bring together all the stakeholders for this kind of project. And this kind of project we're putting in place, that's a team that's adapted to the project. Those are the projects that have got the necessary skills to manage this project. They can simulate things very early on upstream. They can ensure the commissioning of the operation and also the transfer afterwards to the operators, owners, etc. I'm there as the kind of overall manager at the to make sure that the design studies are carried out correctly here, that they represent reality. Then I transfer this to the company so that they can do the work here. And then your work and this notion of the co-development approach here. Well, coming back to the stakes and the challenges here, I think beyond being a technical challenge from a technical point of view, we're installing exactly the same panels here, and Patrick will say so, and it's the same grid, it's the same network. So it isn't a huge challenge from a technical point of view. However, now, it's a societal subject. It's a community that will be living together and will be consuming this energy. And just like in all communities, it's just like in a marriage at the beginning, everybody's happy and it's a great love story, but you don't want it to be too much of a love story. And it's my job, Maxim's job, Patrick's job to provide a regulatory framework. And if there's any litigation, and if we don't agree in terms of the number of electrons we've consumed, we need a regulatory kind of framework here. So we need a kind of wedding advisor here, or we could say a kind of coach to help us out here. Now, this is extremely important. And then afterwards, so what Eddie was saying earlier on, when we consider a conventional operation, energy coaching is very important. It's important to do so. We need to separate the different stakeholders. Residential on one side, we got the children play an important role, the parents of as well, of course. Then you have the coach. The way you coach the residents isn't the same as the people who are working there, and people aren't going to react in the same way if they are just working there compared to living there. This education, we have to educate people to energy concerns here, and this is very important, even more so because we're talking about self-consumption here. Now, Andix, in terms of the supervisor, well, MBIX is basically the kind of means and resource to ensure everything to run fluidly and seamlessly over time. We said if we want to guarantee something throughout the project, we have to be present very early on, very much upstream. We were present from the very beginning of the project. We were present with what I would call two-armed Olivier Ortiga from a legal point of view, two significant commissioning actors here who worked with us on it. It's all those elements that's going to enable us to meet this ambition. Now, this project here we've seen has already been an evolution and a change. To what extent is it kind of anticipating tomorrow's self-consumption approach here? Could we consider this as being a bit of a prototype, or are there things that have to be reviewed? Well, the self-consumption is something extremely well known. Now we were talking about a control and management of existing technologies. Eric mentioned something very important here. The operator of urban services, they are there to deliver the promises based on the developer. I mean, the operator is with us very early on without transferring the project as such. We are managing things together, managing the project together. And I think the demonstrator aspect of Solis is a notion of control. And I am using this word very often, the relevance of the offer from an urban point of view, where we're talking about all possible services, and it's the guarantee that we are offering to what will be taking place downstream, what's necessary. Solis, an inspiration for the future? Well, I would say yes, for two reasons. Let me react to what Eddie just said. The first thing is to meet our commitments and our engagements here. Now, the second round table will comment this, but overall, and I may be a bit brutal here, let's facing, not many people believe or are confident in terms of realtors and property development. Now, either we do it in an American way, here there's no reservation, or we do it in the French way, where unfortunately we have a belt on and we have suspenders at the same time, so it costs a bit more here. Then afterwards, when we talk about the energy consumers or collective self-consumption, as we call it in French here, it's a kind of complex but very virtuous model, but it's more virtuous than just buying or selling your energy back to the national grid here. So I think consider the two elements here, performance on the one side and the energy community. This is a project that can clearly be an example. So a lot of effort, but it's not for nothing. It's worthwhile here. Yes, definitely here is a notion of global cost here, overall cost, comprehensive cost. We're looking at the capex, capital expenditures, but also the opex, the operational expenditures here in those kind of projects. We have to have a management of total cost here. Moving on to Frederic Marcos, who's still with us here, and the ideal project. Same question for you, Frederic.
So,
tell us the story,
Frederic, tell us
the
a little
birth,
bit
and how this
about
project came
how
along
this
in
kicked
this
off
Lyon
this
Confluence
project.
area.
Give us a bit of an overview. So, thank you. So the ideal project was run by a developer and also by the Confluence local public corporation. So we're involved in this self-consumption project. We have 5 buildings in the block. 4 of them have photovoltaic panels, so solar energy, roughly a bit under 1,000 square meters, 164 peak kilowatts in installed rating. Well, we've seen that it's quite easy to install these panels today, but what is specific is that we're adding a battery to them that's 50 kilowatts, which allows the energy produced by the panels in the afternoon to be sent to for areas where there's more consumption needs. You can see, you saw this block in the video. It's a mixed development with partly residential and partly office space. So they have different consumption needs, which is important for self-consumption because we can be more efficient in terms of using up the energy when we have different types of uses. So we have this battery system, which allows us to produce, consume everything, or at least 90% of what we produce, and we can expect to have a high coverage rate. We talked about 50% in the video. There might be it might be a little bit less than that because there's some consumption is during times when there is no sun. So what is specific about this scheme, this operation? Well, what is specific is, like I said, is the battery, which allows us to maximize self-consumption because we can store energy when we've got too much of it. But the role of the battery is also the fact that we can share it more efficiently. That is something that a question which is often raised in terms of real estate is to whether everybody gets value, for money. Everybody owns a bit of the installation, if you like. So those who go to work at 8 o'clock and in the morning and don't come back until 8 o'clock at night are only consuming energy when there's no sun. So somehow they get back some of what they own thanks to this battery. So they really get value. They really get value for money, don't they? It really pays off for them. And that's so everybody wants to get their money's worth. So the second point, which is specific, and in terms of progress, we have gone through our various milestones, definition, contractualization, and installation of the facilities. And one of the first steps in 2018 was to organize this operation with all the legal framework, how to include it in contracts with future owners, what would happen when gradually the developer handed over to the management agencies. So we had to think about lots of new ways to work. And today we have quite a stable scheme, and it was a bit complicated to start out with, but we managed to move from the world of the developer to the residential owners. When we went to their first meeting, we needed to explain why we had chosen to do this, and we asked for their approval for the continuation of the scheme. So we had to explain it all, and we obviously were faced with some people, some owners who who had understood the logic behind it and wanted to continue, but it was somewhat of a challenge because you really have to buy into it. And what happens next? What are the next steps? So that will be the commissioning of the operation and including all the owners, all the residents in the project. That was crucial because we needed, we set up a digital system where everyone, all potential participants will be able to sign up on their own to be involved in the operation. There will be a fully fledged part of it. And in the same way, in just a few clicks, they can withdraw from the system, so they'll have all the information they need on an app. So there is this idea of support and coaching that's seen as just as important as the technical aspects, isn't it? Well, yes. These are complicated operations from a technical point of view, but also quite difficult to explain. We needed to explain to people that for the battery to run properly, then we had to have an idea of the consumption requirements of each apartment and not, for example, load the battery at a time when there was no sun, but a lot of consumption, which would then make it all more expensive. So you need to explain that this is important for optimum use from a financial point of view. Before we move on to our questions, and remember that you can ask questions in the chat. So before we move on to that, I do have a last point. We were talking about the EDF this morning. So what about what is the role of self-consumption, collective self-consumption for the EDF? Is it a love story? Is it a complicated love story? Well, the EDF, the French Electricity Board, has a positive attitude towards or to self-consumption in general. We have our renewable energies division, which has lots of offers for this. We're one of the market leaders for individual homeowners or householders, in fact. So like a lot of energy providers, we looking at the regulations, and we would like it to ensure that it's aligned with a good energy balance, but we are there to get involved in any schemes which correspond to the aspirations of our customers locally. So we've talked about Lyon. It's an example. Will it inspire other areas in France or other regions elsewhere in the world, do you think? Well, yes, definitely. We have already shared information with other EU countries, in our subsidiaries elsewhere, and we can see that the local energy communities regulations is developing differently from one country to another, but we nonetheless intend to share information and sometimes, in fact, pool facilities, because thinking locally and sharing energy are themes which are becoming more and more popular in the whole of Europe. So we've had a few questions in the chat. So first of all, we're going to talk about the time frame for Solis. What's the situation? Well, it'll be ready in this second half, second quarter of. So everything is ready. We just need to connect the battery, and that will be coming soon. So we have another question. I'm going to ask all three of you about the attractiveness, or the appeal for householders, because residents pay more than commercial activities in this type of organization. How can we appeal to them? How can we make it more attractive to these householders? Well, I did say this about Solis. We're a bit different because we have electricity which is produced with heat. So we have heat and electricity generation. We have a mixed price, in fact, which covering the summer months. But with these mixed rates, we are slightly cheaper for residents, and we've managed to find a balance, but it's a bit different, our situation. Well, that's obviously quite a challenge, isn't it? A question to Frederick about the economic appeal of this system. Well, today, it's not the economic driver which is behind these types of operations. The regulations are changing all the time and mean that we can't offer amazing savings. And in fact, for Lyon Confluence, if we didn't have subsidies to buy our battery, we couldn't, in fact, have put it into operation, because this type of facility is too expensive for there to be a real saving. But individual householders on the site and companies will make savings, but it'll be fairly minor compared to what we could have imagined. However, I would say that so far, that wasn't the #1 priority for adopting this operation when we talked to residents about it. So you talked about storing energy in batteries. Have you already tried this out in France, or is that a bit of are you trailblazing on this one? Well, we're pioneers in terms of the scale of the operation, storing energy. Well, there are several operations which exist and which work well. If you set up a battery next to a photovoltaic installation in a supermarket car park, for example, that exists and that works, but the battery will be run. And I think this is a first in France and Europe for a battery being run in this way. We'll have to see the steering efficiency of this, and like I said, how we can maximize the energy consumed as part of the operation. Perhaps we could have another conference on that subject. In the meantime, one last question: how do you make employees, shopkeepers and residents aware of the campaign, of this operation? Have you had a campaign? I think it's something that we have prepared right from the outset. So it's important to communicate regularly to users. I'd like to come back to this idea of coaching that will continue. It's not just when we hand over the keys. It will be on a regular basis to make sure that we keep up the momentum. Yes, it's not just a one-off. So the clock tells me that the first part of this conference is over. I'd like to thank you both for your participation. There are 2 more guests waiting in the wings. So I would also like to thank Frederick for participating. Obviously, if you have any further questions for our three guests, then please continue sending them in and we will get back to you in another way. And I'm going to ask the participants of the next roundtable to join us. That is the energy community definition and issues at stake. So next to me, we have, first of all, Maxime Valentin. Hello. You're in charge of innovation and sustainable development at the Lyon Confluence Public Corporation. What do you do? Just briefly. Well, I have to give instructions to the various developers such as Bouygues in terms of environmental performance, and also help them meet these objectives via partnerships, for example, Scale or Eureka, which we're talking about today. Here we have Patrick Raconondra. Hello. You are regional director at Enedis of the major public affairs projects. In a few words, can you introduce yourself? Well, I'm in charge of all the major projects in the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region. Eureka is part of these projects. It's been part of it for many years, in fact. So and now we'd like to welcome Bruno Gaidon. You're an expert in networks and photovoltaics at HESPL. What's HESPL and who are you? So HESPL is a citizen-based initiative which encourages photovoltaic solutions. It was founded 30 years ago, and the aim was to set up the first photovoltaic installation in France. So it was a crowdfunding effort with 150 participants. So in the next 25 minutes, we're going to talk more about what an energy community is. If it's true that I say that behind this, the idea that people and citizens need to take control of their own energy transition. Yes, that's right. And you have to look at things in terms of the scale. The projects presented just before, we had Ideal, which allows residents to share things at housing block level, and these energy communities can be run at district level or even beyond. So Lyon Confluence is a pioneer in this. Where does this come from? Why did you move in to this? Well, first of all, it is our environmental goals, which have been in existence for some time. And now our number one goal is a good quality lifestyle. So it's public spaces in these buildings. It's also environmental protection and reducing energy consumption. That really is the critical point. And we're also thinking about whether we can actually produce energy. And when you generate energy, and we have about 20 years experience in this now, you then need to know what the limits are to this energy production for co-generation. So we wonder also about the quality of this consumption, and we're wondering also who consumes, how can you set up the operations, how do you get the funding for them? And our experience shows that often there is a correlation between photovoltaic panels on buildings and the residents. Some people don't really hardly even know that they've got solar panels on their roofs. So the idea is to recreate the link between energy generation and the residents. So we've looked at what's happening in the field. Do you think this goal is being met at the moment? Are you surprised by some of the ideas that have been suggested by the developers? I'd say, well, it's a work in progress, isn't it? Our goal, well, we're following our goal to see if it is being achieved. It's not quite finished, but we are satisfied with the progress that has been made. We haven't really talked about the building we're in today, but this is in fact part of a specific project. So we make progress each time. We learn from each project, and we'll be glad when it stops, but we're not ready to stop yet. So in terms of this correlation between people and energy, do you think that this fledgling project creates a stronger bond than in the past? Yes, Mr. Marcos talked about the meeting that when we presented this project to the residents, we were a bit apprehensive. We know that every resident has to buy in to the project. It's not a simple matter. We've been seeking the right solutions for a long time, and also to encourage regulations to change. We were pleased with their reaction, but the next stage will be the impact on their energy consumption. And when when people see their energy bills, and they will become more aware of what they are actually consuming, and will also have an impact on reducing this consumption. So I'm now going to talk to Patrick. I wrote down that these energy communities, you felt that the grid was the backbone to these energy communities. And can you tell us what Enedis did from the outset?
Enedis today, they operate and modernize, manage all the distribution network, the grid in France. This distribution grid or network, it's 1.4 million kilometers, which is several times going around the planet here. So in France, just like elsewhere, it's a backbone in terms of our country. I mean, if we refer to neighborhoods, to districts, as when we consider in the Confluence district here, from the very beginning, we had to think from scratch here. We started off with a white page. We've got this new neighborhood, this new district, which is being revitalized, redeveloped. And what grid, what network do we need to have in place to make sure it meets the ambitions in the future for this neighborhood, for this district? Well, we realize that what had been done, let's say, for the past century, let's put it that way, since the very existence of electricity, and that's to have a backbone in place. And then we say, oh, well, you got the production side, and then we take it right to the area where it's consumed here. And when we consider the projects we just mentioned, and those are pioneering elements here, this very notion of unidirectionality here, the single direction of the electricity is changing. Now it's bidirectional. There are places that are producing their own energy, like we are in the venue are today. And it goes back to the grid here. And the image is coming back there. We are actually a backbone, and to actually be able to implement all these projects here, and we were talking about shared own or self-consumption, we have to become a backbone here, but also we are talking about the spine here, and the spine that involves data. What we've done with the whole consortium here, not all alone, of course, we've all worked together. How can we facilitate the implementation of self-consumption in France. And this territory, this particular territory, is for Enedis is a pioneering area, because it's here that we, in fact, have actually invented this concept, this mechanism that enable throughout France to put in place collective operations, similar collective operations, when Maxime or other developers come along with these complicated projects here. What are you thinking? Oh, no, not again. Or are you thinking, oh, great, we're going to come up with another solution? Oh, we're extremely happy. We're very, very happy. And Maxime has got a lot of ideas, and the consortium's got a lot of ideas as well here. And I would say it's very useful. And this during this period of transition from an ecological point of view and electricity point of view, we need a lot of innovation. This innovation needs to be based on usage, and usage is you, me, is everybody, all the citizens. How can this change over time? And that's where we worked together. Every time there's an idea, for the idea to become a good idea, obviously we need to have identify usage behind it, and we'll work on the innovation that will enable us to move forward. Now, why am I saying that? Often we find innovation, we're very happy, we'll congratulate each other, a tap in the back, but if there's no usage, you can forget it. It's just a form of hallucination. It's totally pointless. And that's what's taking place here, where we're talking about something very concrete with the Confluence district and with the Lyon conurbation here. Every time we're doing something, there's a usage, and it's producing the well-being for the residents, for the local populations. And now we've come up with this solution that we have been able to industrialize, and we can duplicate elsewhere. Now, just let me finish on this one. Here, we've been able to stimulate, accelerate, and industrialize at a city level here, city scale. Bruno Guillot, you're a specialist in terms of photovoltaic energy and grids and networks. What's your point of view here? I mean, is it something as an association, do you advocate this? I mean, as an institution, do you advocate it? Well, clearly, make a difference between the two notions: energy, collective energy, and then self-consumption. The energy kind communities, that has been defined by an EU directive that goes back to 2018, and that allows and authorizes local stakeholders here. It can be local authorities, but it can be companies, small and medium-sized companies, to consume energy together, produce energy, or to manage district heating systems or renewable gas networks or electricity grid here. We're talking a lot about electricity, but it goes beyond that here. And that's European law. And that goes back to the EU directive 2018. The notion of this collective energy has just been transposed into French law. It's a very recent concept here. And previously, we had a transposition of this European law in French law that authorized operations called self-consumption, and that enables consumers to get together to be able to consume together the production of a given facility of renewable energy here, to produce renewable energy here. Now, this is not necessarily the solution, but it's probably one of the solutions here to go towards energy transition in France and in Europe. Is that how you see it, or are there some pitfalls here? As a citizen association and an NGO, it's a concept we find extremely interesting. We're very interested in it here. What we've observed, and coming back to what was said this morning by all the elected officials this morning, things aren't going fast enough. Things are not going fast enough today. I mean, Enedis, by the way, they are monitoring and following up all these operations in France. We've got a total of 50 operations just for 700 people involved. Just to give you an example, the Solis operation added one collective operation will add 150 participants. It will have a significant impact in France in terms of increasing the number of participants to this collective approach. But in terms of the impact on energy transition, it's limited. And there are various reasons that were mentioned earlier on. And our business model or financial model isn't viable here. We've got a certain number of contributions and taxes that apply to this approach, which are shared by the members of the collective group here, and that makes the price of a self-consumption not balanced here. So we're talking about we starting to gain ownership. We're buying more and more in it, but we need to strike the balance in terms of its relevance from a financial point of view. Unfortunately, French law is a stronger, provides a stronger incentive. Even private people who want to come up with a renewable energy approach here, it's better for them to inject it back to the electricity grid than to actually go for self-consumption here. That's due to French law, which is it's not providing an incentive for this kind of collective self-consumption operation. Now, have you got any particular ideas to be able to accelerate this change here? Maxime or you? Yes, well, I think the notion of self-consumption, like Bruno just said, we need to have in mind a couple of things. Self-consumption, in fact, from a collective point of view, and is at the very beginning of things here, very early days. But the concept of self-consumption, let's face it, all the citizens need to gain ownership of it, need to buy in it. Now here, in this particular on stage, we're in a world that knows the concept, with people who know the concept, but people, when you ask them self-consumption, they feel lost. And self-consumption, this very notion is changing here, because in France, we've got 100,000, we've just exceeded 100,000 households that are on this self-consumption concept, whereas just 5 years ago, we only talk about 3,000 households. Our estimate, we will be doubling this number in the coming 2.5 years. So there's a momentum that we're seeing in terms of self-consumption, which is already a first fact here, first interesting fact. That's the first point. Second point, like I said earlier on, when you talk about innovation, you need usage and you need references, you need a standard. And what we've just seen here in these projects in Lyon, we now need these kind of golden standard projects as a showcase. You can visit them, you can have a look at the results, the outcome, and that's it. When we say in the key success factor, well, each of us here, regardless of the innovation, the novelty coming along, we need to be able to have a mirror effect, a showcase effect, saying, oh, it already exists, it is possible. And I would say, I mean, it's not necessarily as easy today when we talk about certain windmills here or using wind energy here, but we work throughout France and we support all of these projects throughout France, which is why this kind of project in Confluence will enable other people to think, and other collectivities or conurbations or developers to think, oh, it is possible. Now, Maxime, coming back to the units that remain to be built here in Lyon Confluence, are you going to focus on the self-consumption or the notion of a collective approach? Have you got a way of promoting it here and advocating it? But it's something we want to further develop, of course, here, for the reasons I mentioned earlier on here. We want to involve more and more the citizens and the residents to come up with a business model, a financial model here. I mean, if we don't self-consume today, let's face it, we have to move on to direct subsidies by the state. How can we make this possible at a vaster level here? And coming back to what was just mentioned earlier on, we're talking about an economic and financial balance that's pretty fragile. The operation which we've just developed together here in the Confluence, we are supported by European programs, and we are funded by Europe here, by the EU. And if we want to change scales, we're going to have to find new models and have a different form of support. So there's a lot of goodwill, but we need some additional financial support. It's not so much a financial support as such. We need to review our model here. Okay, perfect here. Let's move on to questions. The questions I've just received on my tablet here. And Bruno, several of you can answer. How many photovoltaic installations and facilities are there in Lyon Confluence? I've got the answer here. No, I supported I've been with the SPL Confluence unit, which is the local public corporation. We've got 33 installations, and the biggest one is the one in the building. That's the installation of the French tech. Its power is 243 kilowatts, which is 1,600 square meters of PV panels here. So on the territory, it's big. It's significant here. Just to give us a bit of a ballpark, a bit of an idea. Are you talking about the Confluence district, or if you take the whole of Lyon here, Lyon conurbation, if you take the city center, obviously, it's kind of a huge area. Not many buildings in the city center have that kind of surface from a PV point of view, photovoltaic. In the urban, in the peri-urban areas or suburban areas, there are other installations that are more important, but in the city center, it's rare to see it, or even elsewhere in France. And in the future, have we got any particular ideas of what may be done? You need to ask Maxime Valentin here. And well, a lot remains to be done. Each project that will be established here in Lyon Confluence will reduce their energy consumption and will produce renewable energy. The choice of photovoltaic solutions seems to be really the coming standard here. Now, as Bruno said, the H7 is something a bit special. We're talking about a rehabilitation, a regeneration of an existing building with a very specific capacity here. A question, probably for Patrick, but for all of you, how can we go faster in terms of the ecological transition? We were talking about French citizens being able to go towards a self-consumption in a facilitated way. Is there anything you see in the coming years here? Well, there's something which we can already mention here when we're talking about accelerating this ecological transition here. We were talking about an economic optimum here, a new economic model. That's where technical innovation helps drive the economic model. There's a cornerstone that was put in place in France that's called LINKT, which is, as you know, a connected energy counter here. Now we put it in place at the very beginning, and we wanted it to be deployed throughout the Confluence district. Why? Because the LINKT energy counter enables not just to measure the consumption, but also production here. And you need to know this innovation, this ability today. I mean, when we talking about self-consumption, for each people we link up, it's 600 euros that are saved. And for those people who know how to manage the economics and the financials, talking about self-consumption, saving 600 per household is very important, or per housing unit. And then afterwards, I talked about the spine here, the backbone here, and that's using data. And I would say that the roadmap, which we've put in place, we were the first European distributor to go for an open data approach here. The idea is to be able to accelerate the possible projects and the possible studies, and to have the data very early on. I'm going to be the technicals here, and then afterwards to have what we call APEs that can be directly used by the stakeholders, and that means the necessary data just to make that the future projects can be rapidly implemented. And every time we're working with the stakeholders to make sure that we can anticipate future costs. Now we're developing this, like I said, we stimulate using the full ecosystem here, and then afterwards we need to be able to industrialize it afterwards here. And today this industrialization mode up is being inputted by this kind of project which we've seen here in Lyon in the Confluence district, and we're going to continue it far from being over. That's going to require a next conference. Unfortunately, we reached the end of this second roundtable. I'm just going to ask Maxime for a couple of words of conclusion, but that will be afterwards here. Now, you are the kind of a local representative based on what we saw this morning and this roundtable and the previous roundtable. How do you see the future of these new energy communities here? Have you got reasons to really be optimistic? Well, we have to be optimistic, optimists here. Well, that's the idea, the very idea of Lyon Confluence. Well, what I would retain is a notion and two examples. The first notion, to paraphrase Etienne Barali, who works on this, people need to be at the core, at the center of things. And we saw this this morning during the first session. Work together, collaborate at European level between cities here. We need to collaborate and cooperate as we're doing on stage here. As you noticed, we haven't all got the same goals and objectives, the same fears, concerns, or ambitions. However, we do share a common sense here, and we want to move forward towards this ecological transition. And what you said, Patrick, just earlier on here, and that's the second strand, the second part, make sure that the people, that the final users, and all of us, because we're all end users here, we need to be at the center of things, at the heart of things, at the core of things. We are there to come up with the truth. Is it working or isn't it notion? It's notion of common collaboration and cooperation and integrating the users who will do the right thing or not here. Now, obviously, Lyon Confluence and the SPL is doing the maximum to maintain this momentum here. Thank you very much for all the teams, all the technical people here. The next session will be this afternoon within the framework of our session here. We got the slide here, and that will be the session called Zero Carbon Sonderbourg by 2029, and that will be taking place at 2 p.m. So we'll all meet at 2 p.m. and this is going to be another collective energy session. Thank you very much and have an excellent weekend.